Welcome to Marketing People Love. My name is Jacques Spitzer, and today I have a discussion that I have been looking to dive into with the perfect person, and I found it. And it is a discussion on building in public. Now, it's a newer phenomena, the idea of truly building a brand in public, talking about it on your social media channels, sharing intimate details of the journey. And I'm going to break down with Ollie, who's working on Lucky Lad, what his thought process has been, how it's led to massive breakthroughs for his brand so far, and just some of the psychology behind the idea of building in public. Because I think a lot of us fear that if we put information out into the world, that our competitors will steal it, that it'll invite competition, that ultimately it will be maybe a negative thing. We don't necessarily think of all the positives that can happen. And so can't wait to share this conversation with you. Ollie, welcome to Marketing People Love.
Thank you. Good to talk to you, Jacques. How you doing?
Good. So I know I'll establish in this intro that you and I have been acquaintances on the internet, I would say is the best way to put it. But it's been so interesting because I've watched you go from someone who is analyzing marketing in your content to actually launching your own public brand and building very publicly. And so just for people that are listening today, take us through maybe we'll call it 6 months to a year leading up to this decision to launch your brand. And what were you thinking about? What were you learning? Like, why did you do this? We'll talk a little bit more later about why do it publicly, but why even the idea of launching a brand? Where did it all start?
Yeah, totally. So been kind of like doing little bits and pieces of e-com for like the past 5 or 6 years, and just kind of over that period of time learned a few different things about consumer brands. So I used to work in the agency space and like would help with some launch strategy for a bunch of these brands in CPG. And I guess like finding number one that kind of led me down this path of launching my own thing was basically this like weird little ecosystem of brands coming out of content where basically like I think the way that people probably consume brands in like maybe my parents' generation or like a generation older than that was like you kind of walk down a grocery store, there's all these legacy brands that you've been buying from for like decades and decades of your life. And then now I could be like, I could have had the same water bottle brand for my entire life, and then some dude just kind of like makes me laugh on TikTok, and I'm willing to completely uproot that ritual and like buy a new water bottle because of some creator. So that was pretty fascinating to see over the past couple of years. And I was basically the like kind of ethos for Lucky Lad and launching the brand was I was trying to find some health solutions that were super unique to people my age. I'm like a 26-year-old and like had this really weird love-hate relationship with alcohol where, it's like a really awesome social lubricant, and like there's a lot of things you do with friends where alcohol's involved, and it like does really kind of make an environment easier or like better to be in. But then there's all these like compounding horrible health effects where like it messes with my sleep, productivity, and my brain doesn't work the next day. So I personally like for the longest time had this crazy stack of like different liver detox ingredients and electrolytes and different things that I'd mashed together to try to help build like a protocol around drinking. And I'd like watch all these podcasts about how like different health experts recommend using products for alcohol and liver detox stuff. And dude, like I saw all these like really viral liver detox shots coming out of East Asia, and like everyone in like Vietnam, South Korea, Japan probably know this, but it's kind of just like a part of drinking culture there where you finish drinking, you walk into a convenience store, you drink one of these liver detox shots, and it's just like everyone does it. It's not like a niche alternative wellness thing. And then in like the US and Canada, where like everyone's just kind of like pounding Gatorades and like doing whatever. There's like people are just like Uber Eatsing McDonald's in the morning, and there's nothing really good that like works effectively, and like that there's no like urban legends around like whatever. So tried to build a product there that was a way better experience to what people are doing currently for hangovers. And yeah, just like been launching that for the past like 6 months, but it's been really fun.
And so it sounds like you had this overarching idea, we'll call it brewing, and you brought it to life. I think I've been so curious because I'm curious how intuitive it was to you to start building that in public, sharing along the journey, what decisions you were making, asking for support or help online. What was going through your mind and is going through your mind in these early stages of Lucky Lad as you're growing it? as it comes to sharing the journey publicly?
Yeah, totally. So I started kind of sharing this journey about the brand a year ago, right when I started building it. And there was a couple different reasons for it. So I sort of started on TikTok as sort of this like commentator type face around like marketing and like different trends in the ecosystem and like brand advice. And there was like a few different formats I'd work within, like kind of like talking about different brands that we're launching. Like I made a ton of videos about creator brands and just kind of like growth strategy as a whole. And I think like people would watch these videos to be like, okay, like I'll learn like a cool thing about like what people are doing in the space right now. And then I was kind of going through this process of launching my own brand, and that started becoming all consuming. And I wanted to find a cool way to document everything I was doing for the brand. Just like honestly for myself, I thought it was really cool to have this like, oh, I can look back like a year into the past. Like I'm big on journaling. Like I have a bunch of these journals filled up with like a bunch of different stuff. But when it comes to a lot of the brand stuff, I wanted to kind of document everything I was working on, little decisions I was making, things I would learn, things that would set me back. And it's like fun now to even go back and watch videos I'd make a year ago and just be like, oh shit, like I had no idea how to like, you know, like what a 3PL was and like how to work with like people and logistics and stuff. And it's like wild how much you learn over the course of a year. But a lot of it was for documenting. And also with content, like I always tried to like be conscious of this line of, you know, like no one ever like really knows if they're an expert at something or not. And like it always felt kind of gross to be like giving this absolute advice or this like really definitive advice about brand building. So I'm like, I'm doing a very narrow thing in a really specific way, and there's a million different ways to run a brand. And, you know, I never wanted to be like, oh, like refer to this person on like how to launch an e-commerce brand. So I always tried to position it more as like, this is what I'm personally doing and the things I'm learning. And it's like one of a million ways to do it. So I tried to like reflect.
You're like, unless it really, really, really works. And then you're like, and then follow exactly what I said. I'm now the guru.
Dude, totally. Like I never wanted anyone to like stitch my videos and be like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting because the idea of building in public is new. I mean, when you say new, I'm trying to think of, there are some people out there right now, especially, you know, as you get involved if in the, I don't know whether they call it X or Twitter now, but like online, there are some people that are very big. You know, I'm thinking about all of the operators behind the Operator podcast where they're sharing such intimate details about what they're investing in, decisions they're making. They're a little bit further along. So it's interesting when you are listening to, I think people underestimate the difference between listening and watching to someone who's already at 50 million, 100 million, 200 million in sales versus going from that 0 to 1 million. Right? That is way harder. 0 to 1 million is way harder than any other million you'll ever do in business. And there's not a lot of people that are, I would say, vulnerable enough to put themselves out there to know that it could work. It could not work. It could, you know, it could accelerate and help your journey. It could invite competition. You know, I was thinking about these guys behind Brez or Breeze. I don't know how to pronounce it. See,
Brez, yeah.
Look at me, Brez, yeah. And they're very publicly building. They're posting screenshots of their actual progress, and it's impressive. It makes you go, oh, well, there's a market for this. Like, I mean, they are putting it out there. And so I'm curious to ask, you know, and I have thoughts on this. But my question is let's say this does work and works really, it really starts to take off. What is your thoughts around inviting competition by sharing so intimately what you're doing? Or are you not planning on necessarily sharing the success, just more so the process of decisions being made? Curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, like I definitely, like I love what the Brez guys are doing, and I definitely want to get as hardcore as them about like sharing numbers and sharing how much stuff costs and like tracking progress in a lot of detail. I love that. At least like for what I'm doing in e-commerce, it's like generally people have a pretty good gauge about like categories that are heating up in the space. Like you could just walk through a Whole Foods and like, you know, for hangovers, see that like 6 months ago, there was nothing really at checkout where you could buy these like hangover capsules. Same with like Erewhon, like whatever, these like trendy stores. And you can see the evolution of categories, and like, you don't really need to be a genius or like to be like patrolling the internet to like see what's happening in the space. And, you know, like I'm trying to make like a really great, interesting, novel product and like use a unique form factor like gummies. But like ultimately anyone can spin up a Shopify brand and like, you know, put like couple like tens of thousands of dollars and like launch a brand overnight. And like my moat isn't really like, you know, the product or at least like this is the way I saw it, or like how to make the product or like the ingredients or like even frankly like my numbers. I think like, you know, there's other ways people can find out how categories are doing other than like me sharing my numbers on Twitter. And I was just like more kind of interested in building this like indefensible brand. And, you know, like that's at least like the way that I consume products. It's like, you know, like something means something to you. It's really unique to like a super narrow specific situation in your life, and it's the only product or the best product for that situation. And yeah, I just like, I never thought, especially for like e-commerce or consumer products, it's like, oh, like you're oversharing and like people are going to copy you. It's like people are going to copy you regardless. Yeah, I'm cool with being transparent, and at least like the way I look in terms of like sharing your numbers and sharing everything, I think like you invite more opportunities in than you like block yourself off from opportunities for people copying you or whatever. It's like me just sharing like minor things about my design, my packaging, like, you know, different visions or ideas I have for future products. It had like such cool, interesting people reach out being like, oh, let me help you with this, or like I have a facility that can help you make this. So I'm like, I'd rather not turn that away by like always being feared of like, or scared or like fearing people copying me or like people jumping on this stuff.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that thought process. I think there's one of the most interesting things I've seen from, I'll say, more naive entrepreneurs out there, because we work with so many people, we talk to so many people, and one of the misconceptions people have is that competition's bad. Right? It's so interesting to me because people just assume having competition's bad. And yet, you know, you start to realize that everyone wins when the total addressable market, the TAM, grows. You know, and I first saw this when we were working with Dr. Squatch, and, you know, they were able to take this tiny, tiny category of all natural men's soap that like, who's going to pay $9 for a bar of soap? And then, you know, Buchanan's out there, there's a couple other players out there, and they all won. I mean, they all have, not only like all of these big all natural soap players are now bigger than the entire total addressable market was 5 years ago. Like, you know what I mean? It's like when the pie grows, everyone wins. And I think you had a good point of like where this product shows up. It's like, well, if the category moves towards the checkout aisle, then that, or if it moves into being normal to be in airports at the kiosk, like if there are normalizations of these, like even if your competitors get there first, but they normalize that these products exist, that there's a place for them at retail, all of those, you know, things, or even just trial of it. I would say like the worst possible thing, let's say you're like a men's essential, like premium essentials brand, and you buy like a $70 shirt and you have a crappy experience. Are you going to buy more $70 shirts? But like, let's say you have a great experience and then you get an ad for another brand and you're like, ooh, there's another brand, maybe I'll try them. I've had a great experience trying a $70 basic t-shirt or pair of pants before. You know what I'm saying? It's like you want your competitors to succeed in some sense. And I to throw back to the Brez guys, I'm like, they are like right now single-handedly trying to create this category. They are the original people in space. And let's say they'll do, like, just make it up, like let's say they'll do 25 million. The road to 500 million is it becoming a category that is literally available in grocery stores.
Right.
It's the only way. So how do they get there? They need other players, people with big political money, people that are willing to take risks, take chances with the upside to grow the total addressable market. So I always just think about how interesting it is that people have this like scarcity fear mindset around. Yeah, I would say the bigger fear I would have building a public is just the reality is that so many businesses just can't succeed. They don't succeed for a variety of reasons. And it's not always just because of the product or the marketing. It could be the readiness of the industry, the readiness of consumers. And so I would love to ask you a little bit about some of the positives you've already seen from sharing your story publicly, has it led to either new connections, breakthroughs, things that have already accelerated and helped the brand?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, like I was sharing kind of like every minor detail about the brand on TikTok early on, from like, oh, here are different logo iterations that I work through. Like, here was my thought process around, the product and the packaging and everything. And like, people were gravitating to different pieces of this, and it was super interesting. And eventually I got to this point where there was this sort of like manufacturing hurdle that I was experiencing. Like, I was working with a facility, we were doing these like small batch orders, like kind of producing some gummies in like really, really tiny quantities. And I needed a factory to kind of help me ship this out. And, it was like really tough finding gummy manufacturers at the time, because, either you're dealing with these like massive confectionery companies that make candies and like they're not really going to want to put these supplement active ingredients in them, or there's these like massive supplement companies and they just kind of have like one piece of machinery that, makes gummies, and, like they're not going to want to like talk to you if you're a tiny brand and you have these like tiny quantities. So it's really, really hard to find people early on as like a bootstrap business to do this.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I was just like kind of like shot in the dark, threw up a TikTok story one day trying to find a facility, and not even like a post, but one of those stories like with a black screen, like white text, Comic Sans.
Oh my gosh.
Being like,
that really was a Hail Mary.
Absolute Hail Mary. And was like, anyone here like know someone with a gummy facility? And I had like 2 guys reach out, one of them that like ended up actually working with, who was like, yeah, like I have a facility, I make gummies, like I've been watching your, it was just like a user 2427 type guy.
Yep.
And he's like, been watching your content for like the past year, like give me a call, would love to help out. And, like margins were really shitty and we were just like breaking even, but he was like, he helped me like get the like product to the stage super early on where I could do these tiny quantities and test it out and get it out there. So it like helped me not raise money at like a stage where I was like almost forced down that path.
I mean, it's incredible to think about. I mean, I think it's fair to say you probably would have found a way, right? But the reality is that by sharing your story and having people invested in it, they were willing to invest in you by helping bring this to life. Because I think one of the things that people with a new idea oftentimes like underestimate is, it's a lot of time and energy for a manufacturer to actually make your product, especially when they're trying to fit it in. Let's say they are a bigger manufacturer and they have people ordering millions and millions of dollars worth of product. And then here you come along with an idea and a logo and you're like, hey, I got $10,000. Can you help me? And it's like, well, the amount of energy that goes into standing up a brand new brand, a brand who doesn't understand FDA guidelines, doesn't understand how things get mixed, doesn't understand where product comes from, doesn't understand how changing their formulations could change their cost of goods sold so much that it would, make it so that it wouldn't be a viable product, doesn't understand the regulatory around what needs to be on the packaging, doesn't, you know what I mean? Like all of these, it's like, there's not a lot of good reason for these manufacturers to take on first-time entrepreneur new brands in these spaces, because it's like, okay, well, basically they're not, there's going to be so much time and energy that goes into the first, we'll call it $10,000 to $50,000 worth of product that they're asking you to buy, that it's like, well, that's a lot of time and energy for something that doesn't have product market fit, has all of these potential issues, and it's basically going to potentially be a major headache. And I've noticed that when people either have a good track record and or in your case, like have been building trust with an audience, it helps for people to go, you know what, this person's serious. They're not just like, this isn't just an idea that they like fly by the night, like, oh, I've always wanted to do something, I'm just going to do it. It's like, no, I'm going to do this with or without you. I'd love your help. That's a very different posture. And it's cool to hear that wasn't, I mean, I have to imagine that wasn't ever, when you started this, probably wasn't the outcome or what was in your mind as to like, oh, by sharing publicly, it may actually help me make this a reality because I'm going to hit these roadblocks. And I think I just wanted to put an exclamation point on that, because it's something that I think my business partner and I are fortunate to be advisors in a lot of different startups, in a lot of different, direct-to-consumer brands in general, even if they're not a startup. And it's amazing when you have someone that you can rely on and connect to that can find you the answer in a way that like, oh my gosh, I mean, how much Googling would you have to do? I mean, imagine you don't get that reference. It's like, how much Googling do you have to do to be like, who can make this very specific gummy form factor with a product, like a formulation that literally has never existed before because I've been tinkering with it. I mean, think about that. And it's like the ability to put it out on the internet and have it find the right person. That's powerful.
100%. Yeah. Like, well, first of all, just the dynamic of people coming to you rather than like you going to people is so different and so much better. Dude, yeah. Like I used to be really bad at like asking people for help in this space, like whether it was like an e-com or like friends who are launching brands. It's always like you're at such a different stage and like you're going to ask them like the dumbest questions ever, like how to find a manufacturer. It's like, I'm sure there's like a 3-step thing that everyone does that I just don't know about, and it's going to be the dumbest thing to ask. But like creating content sort of just like helped me overcome that, where it's like, you know, you post these like tiny things that you're running into early on and you're finding like brands way bigger than you being like, dude, I learned something from you talking about how you like sourced your packaging or got your rates down for the specific thing. So like everyone's dealing with like little things here and there. But yeah, totally, like the putting content out there is like almost helped me build this like little advisory board around myself, which has been interesting. Like, you know, I've been able to like meet really cool guys like yourself who like, I hit you up the other day to be like, you know, I'm like, I want to do some creative testing now. And like, you're my go-to guy to ask for advice on that. And like, there's been a guy who I found who's like an absolute killer on affiliate. And like, you know, I go to him whenever I have questions about posting content there. So you kind of like attract these like weird people from different backgrounds and you sort of like build this advisory board around yourself, which is really, really awesome.
That's a great way of I mean, it's interesting because I'm thinking about how interesting it is because you put out value into the world with your content. You have been giving people something even before you started building your brand. You were just putting value out there, right? I started following you because I liked your content. I started following your story. And so then when you did reach out, because I was thinking about, you know, the reality is, and I share this because I think it's an interesting, like I'm just processing it myself. I'm like, okay, with our agency, we get somewhere between 300 to 400 businesses a month that reach out to us, right? We just can't, we can't take those calls. I don't, especially when someone's in a startup phase. To your point, like product doesn't even exist. You're like, hey, I haven't raised money. Like I can't afford you, but can we still talk, right? And it didn't even cross my mind not to connect with you because you'd been putting value out into the world. And I think that's a really interesting thought process that like, okay, no, I've already, as someone who has been following you, I've already received something from you. So it felt so natural to be like, yeah, of course I'll meet with you. Of course, like we can chat about this. How can I help? And it's something that, I mean, even as I'm processing it right now, I'm like, oh, that's really powerful because ultimately, I mean, we've been spending a lot of time talking about building in public, but to me, the crux of this is you've been putting value through content, you've been putting value out into the world, right? Before you started this brand even. And as you've done that, you have attracted people who are interested in business, interested in marketing, interested in these things. But you've also done it in a way where you've never asked them for anything, right? You've only given to them. It goes back to like even the old Gary V, it was a like jab, right hook kind of concept. And so just very interesting to think about. Let me ask you this, with the future, since you are building so publicly, what do you have in your mind for like next? Like now that you have a product, now that you're able to sell it, now that it is selling, what are you thinking about next? And how much of that connects back? Like you're going to build in public anyway, but how does building in public connect to what you're hoping to do next?
Yeah, so definitely want to continue building in public. And I think like as the brand grows and scales, like want to get more and more transparent about stuff like, you know, numbers and like how the brand's doing revenue wise and like different things I'm spending money on and like agencies and people I use. So definitely that's a big priority for me. In terms of like the future and the vision for the brand, like right now, the number one thing I'm focusing on is how do I make this the best product in the world at hangovers? And like the way I see it is like, you know, I can attach like a really fancy wrapper to this and like nail down my growth strategy and like pick the right channels. But essentially, I feel like all of that just sort of naturally comes together when you have the best product. So like right now, a lot of the work I'm doing is like trying everything out there, like listening, trying to talk to every single person who's touched this product and find out like their experience with it. How do I make it better? How do I make it taste better? What are these different unique angles that people are using it for that I'm not maybe aware of? And like just try to learn as much as possible about the experience. One thing that I've always really found like interesting and cool as like a North Star for like what I want this brand to be is like I was always super fascinated at what happened with the brand Zyn over the past couple of years. And like, you know, obviously like my product's like really different, but it just kind of like became this cultural monolith, and it like had so much better branding and PR than other nicotine products have in the past. Where like, you know, like all these like nicotine alternatives like vaping and like, you know, obviously like cigarettes, it's like it's always kind of had this like disgusting undertone where everyone's like, oh, these like kids are always vaping and it's like really gross. But Zyn's, it's like it almost like took on a life of its own where it reached this nootropic community where people are using it as like a cognitive enhancer, and it was this like clean alternative to smoking, and it almost became this cool thing where people pulled out a Zyn at like a dinner table. Everyone's asking for one. And that product just sort of like took on a life of its own outside of that category of like nicotine products. So I've always envisioned like Lucky Lad and like what we're trying to do for hangovers with gummies and like an interesting form factor to kind of have a presence like that where it grows into this like thing bigger than, you know, like a hangover solution, where it's kind of like this thing that, you know, people love and people love sharing with their friends, and it's sort of like shorthand and like the go-to product and people think of drinking or like their protocol for drinking.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love it's an interesting analogy because I think, you know, I take a lot of there's a couple brands that I follow very closely, and one of them actually, and man, I gotta find the clip because it's so friggin' good. But it's Mike who runs. He started Liquid Death. I think a lot of people talk about Liquid Death, and I think they at times miss the point. You know, It's like there's so much there that people go, oh, well, it's not for me. I'm like, well, one, the fact that you're talking about it is a miracle in itself. It's one. So like, let's just start there. Two, he was on this podcast. I think it was a BC20 or something like that. But he's on this podcast, and he was talking about something you said earlier in his podcast, which is, hey, you know, even with your formulation, it's like technically you can keep iterating on that, but then if it works, like then people just reverse engineer it and create the same product, right? It's like all the raw materials, all the ingredients are out there. And he has this great quote where he was like, look, you know, I can't just sell canned water because then anyone can can water. I can't sell some special ingredient because then someone who's bigger with more money can buy it cheaper and put it in everything and put it in every store faster. He's like, the only thing that's defensible is creating a brand. And I think you saw recently a Liquid Death-esque water. I think it was like, this is not beer, or some brand came out, and immediately people are like, that's a knockoff of Liquid Death. And I think that, you know, you're in this interesting moment where you're sharing publicly, you're generating this brand in a space that is in its infancy. I love that it's big in other countries. It's always like a good barometer for like, okay, well, it can become part of the cultural norm, which is a weird thing. It's like the thought process of like, does a product have to create a new cultural norm? A lot of times they do end up. Zyn was a good example, so I'm thinking about it. And but ultimately, it's like you got to have people excited about Lucky Lad in a way that, you know, eventually everyone else is seen as a knockoff would be the ultimate dream as a brand. Because to your point, people will come. And they should. Like, if it's a great solution, it's only going to benefit your brand and every other brand to grow that awareness, grow the where it's at. But it's like, what are those defensible, you know, we call them like brand assets? Like, what are the true things that people look at and they go, yeah, like that's Lucky Lad. That is unique. That's something that they're doing differently. And you may find it maybe a form factor that you don't have now. I know right now it comes in like a big tub. Maybe it ends up being more like an Altoids, you know, like less number of them, a little bit more portable. You got me thinking about like Zyn and all that. I'm like, this would be something that you could, in a different form, even break out at a party or at a club or whatever. And people are like, oh yeah, like I'll take a Lucky Lad. Like, of course I want to feel better the next morning. You know, I don't want to feel gross or whatever. But it's like, in order to achieve that cultural moment, it has to be in the right packaging and the right settings and the right marketing. I mean, it's all the things to create that movement. So I love that. I think, let me ask you this as a final question. If someone is either already building and or thinking about building a brand and thinking about sharing things publicly, obviously they can check out what you're doing, but what would be your advice and or, like, imagine I'm that audience, like I'm that person, you're talking to me, you can talk to everybody, but like, what would you say to somebody who's like, hey, I don't know if I'm as brave as you or as smart as you or as clever as you, right? Like, I'm not a content creator. Can I really do this? What would you say to them? It could be, your answer might be, don't do it if you're not actually a good content creator. But what would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think like the reason why I put off posting content, you know, why I didn't do it a year earlier is there's this like weird image in your head of like people in your life, whether it's like from high school or whatever, like laughing at you or just like sharing it around. And like the reality when I started posting stuff was that generally everyone in your life who you're scared of kind of like having a negative perception of it, they're all like extremely supportive and like everyone's really, really cool about it. And the people who are going to like laugh at you or make fun of you, they're probably doing it anyways. You just don't know about it. So there's like a lot of power in just like people knowing what you're doing, kind of to the point of what we were talking about earlier of, you know, it's like these crazy opportunities came up, not from like me asking and begging for them, just from someone knowing what I was dealing with, my struggles, like what I was looking for, and people just reaching out and wanting to help. Like people like naturally have an inclination to want to help. Like I reached out to you. It's like, you know, you didn't think about it twice. You're super helpful and giving me a bunch of advice. Most people are like that. And I would say like just start with like seeing the power of just your friends and your inner circle knowing what you're working on. Like you don't have to create this crazy TikTok account or this like Twitter account and start trying to like grow this massive audience. Just try like posting about your brand or your like what you're working on, whatever, to your Instagram followers and to your story, and like see the responsiveness and see what comes back to you. Like you'd be surprised, like you have a friend who does this one thing, who has a connection, who can help you out. And even like within your own network and your own circle, you'll see all the power and the benefit of it. And like that's at least for me, like just sharing it with my friends and like seeing the effects of that, like is kind of what pushed me to be like, all right, I'll share it with this broader audience and see what comes back.
I love that advice. I mean, because you have all these people who support you, some of them love you, they want to be part of your journey, they want to help you, they want to connect you, they want to be, acting on your behalf. And that's such an interesting thought that I think oftentimes we think about the millions of people rather than like maybe the 30 people in our life that actually love and support us the most. And if they are part of the journey and part of what we are doing could in fact help make that one connection that could change everything. So dude, thanks for being on the podcast and for continuing to share your story publicly. I can't wait. I'm excited to hear the updates along the way. No, I'll be following along.
Of course, man. I'll send you some. Would love to know what you think.
All right, that's what we have for you today. Thank you for joining us for Marketing People Love. I love that you are making yourself a better marketer, a better brand builder every time you listen to an episode like this. Can't wait to see what you start building in public next. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode, an opportunity to learn more about marketing people love.